Aquaman's Misunderstanding. The last few beams of evening sunshine scorched the August sky a deep orange, and a welcome breeze blew with it a sweet aroma which hung heavily in the thick summer air. Colin loved days like this, despite the discomfort it can bring, and he undid another button on his shirt to try and keep himself from sweating for as long as possible. He was waiting for his girlfriend, Rachael, outside their favourite Italian restaurant called La Seppia. He had no idea what it meant, but there was a picture of a squid up there on the sign, so he imagined that must have something to do with it. The sound of high heels on the pavement made Colin turn to see the slim figure of Rachael walking towards him, with her arms wide open. Her pale blue summery dress fluttered as she walked, and she wore her hair up in a neat bun. "Happy anniversary, Aquaman," she teased, throwing her arms around him. "Happy anniversary, honey. You look amazing," said Colin, wishing she'd stop calling him that. An overly tanned waiter with a glued-on smile guided them across the busy floor of the restaurant to the secluded table they had asked for especially, to avoid getting a table near the fountain in the middle of the room. It was only a small fountain, but someone had had the genius idea of adding a kind of blue dye to the water, which gave the impression that ink was squirting from the tentacles of the marble squid that sat on top. The trickling sound of the water added to the relaxed atmosphere of the place, but the problem was that every now and again, inky blue drops of water threatened to stain anyone's clothes who dared to sit close enough. They'd been to La Seppia many times before, and both knew exactly what they were going to order, but they looked through the menu anyway. Colin regularly suffered from something Rachael liked to call food envy, which is brought on by the awful moment when your food arrives and the other person's food looks better than your own. "What are you getting?" Colin asked Rachael, just to be safe. "I know it's boring ordering the same thing every time, but I really fancied the tortellini again," she giggled. "God, doesn't it feel like a lifetime ago when we came here on our first date? Can you believe that was 5 years ago?" Colin thought about that rainy afternoon when they first met. They were both waiting at a bus stop and caught each other's eye. Rachael smiled at him, but he was too shy to even try to start a conversation, and he kicked himself as he saw that his bus was arriving and his window of opportunity was closing. He was much too distracted by her to notice the giant puddle in front of him on the road. And for some reason, perhaps just a simple act of pure evil, the bus driver decided not to stop for him, but instead to hit the puddle at full speed and send a tidal wave of dirty brown rainwater sailing straight up into Colin's face. She screamed, even though it was Colin who got soaked. And thanks to him, her raincoat was shielded from receiving even the smallest droplet of dirty brown water. Speechless and embarrassed, Colin turned to her, with water dripping from every possible inch of his body. "You saved me," she said theatrically. "You're my hero, my very own Aquaman." And she asked him where he was heading, offering to take him in a taxi as a gesture of gratitude for his heroism. They exchanged numbers and decided to meet up for a date the following Friday evening. Rachael was wondering why Colin wasn't even looking at her. She was excited about the fact that they were celebrating 5 years together, but he didn't seem to care at all. She squirmed in her chair and sighed loudly. Colin narrowed his eyes slightly, reminiscing about their first date. Butterflies flew around nervously in his stomach that night as he waited for her outside La Seppia, and he made a promise to himself that he was not going to screw this one up. Earlier that day, it had been raining like monsoon season in Mumbai, and the pavements were glistening with rainwater when he heard a familiar voice shout out from underneath an umbrella, "Aquaman, it's you!" she cried like the victim in a superhero film, and he grinned widely, mesmerized by how beautiful he thought she looked. He took 2 steps towards her, but somehow his right foot seemed to miss the pavement, and instead of landing on tarmac, it sank perfectly into a deep, round hole, allowing his arch nemesis, Dr. Freezing Cold, Brown, Smelly, Horrible Rainwater, to flood over the top of his shoe and soak eagerly into his sock. Rachel knew how uncomfortable it made Colin to talk about their relationship and future plans, and she could feel the tears welling up in the corners of her eyes. Why can't he just communicate like a normal person? She asked herself. Is it that difficult to have an adult conversation for once? He'd never been so embarrassed in his whole life, and he remembered how he wished that puddle could have swallowed him whole. But he'd never forget the way Rachel just laughed, the way she does, making him soon forget anything had even happened. He knew from that moment that he'd found someone special, and realised that he should tell her more often just how much she meant to him. Well, I've had enough of this, Rachel thought angrily. My mother was right. Men are just overgrown children who can't commit to what they want for dinner, never mind another human being. She pressed her lips together as tears began to roll down her cheeks. She couldn't deny it any longer. It was obvious to her. Their relationship was going nowhere, and it was time to face the fact that they just weren't meant to be together. Completely unaware of the emotional volcanic eruption that was about to blow on the other side of the table, Colin snapped out of his daydream and was shocked to see long black streaks of mascara running down Rachel's cheeks. "Oh, Colin," she cried desperately. "You know we can't keep going on like this." Every word she spoke held the weight of months of frustration, doubt and denial, and it upset her even more to hear it out loud. "Babe," Colin stuttered, open-mouthed, staring at her as he tried to make sense of the situation. He didn't have a clue what to say, but it was too late. Rachel threw her napkin on the table and covered her mouth with her hand as she got to her feet. "I knew it," she said. "You can't even look at me." Colin couldn't help but glance around the room. She was shouting now. "Just tell me what's..." "Don't," she interrupted as Colin began to stand up. "I need to be alone." His hands were out in front of him, pleading with her to calm down. But all he could do was watch as she ran towards the exit, her high heels clicking loudly on the tiled floor. She was gone. Silence fell over the restaurant, and Colin felt like the eyes of the world were upon him as he sighed helplessly and sat back down, feeling dejected and frustrated, wondering what on earth had just happened. The tinkling sound of cutlery on plates soon filled the room again, and the trickling of the fountain could no longer be heard over the chatter of people getting back to their conversations. A man was smiling sympathetically at Colin from a neighbouring table, and he lifted his glass in the air as if making a toast. "You can't live with them, and you can't live without them," he heard him say as his wife hit him gently on the arm, shaking her head in disapproval. Colin exhaled heavily as he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out a small black box. He placed it on the table in front of him and opened the lid. His eyes lost focus as the light from the candle reflected brightly off the diamond engagement ring. The evening had not gone at all as he had hoped, and as the candle flame went out, a thin plume of swirling white smoke rose up into the air above the table.